In the year 1930, then US President Herbert Hoover issued one of the most aggressive tariff policies we've seen up until that point. And well, between that and the Great Depression, it brought on one of the worst economic turmoils in the history of the United States, but also the global economy as well. Now, fast forward, President Trump is doing something that hasn't been done in almost 100 years. And of course, the big question on everyone's mind is, well, what's gonna happen this time, especially revolving the US housing market?
Here we go again.
But for those that may not know, hi, my name is Daniel Kwok. I'm an 8-figure real estate investor and entrepreneur, and whose business is based a lot on these policies and what I've been seeing on tariffs and what will most likely happen based on historical data. This may create a market where people either absolutely lose their shirts or experience the equivalent of winning the lottery. Now, I'm sure this is probably not the first video that you've seen on tariffs, so I'll spare the Webster Dictionary definition of what they even are. However, here are the 3 guaranteed outcomes we can expect to see in the housing market and for you as a homeowner as a result of what President Trump has done so far. Starting with number 1, which is that the cost of building a new home or renovating an old home is not only going to increase, but it may skyrocket. So let's say we're looking at 2 of the biggest costs in building a home, which is lumber and drywall. Now, let's play a game. The question is, how much of the lumber and drywall material needed to build new homes in the United States do we import from other countries? I'll give you 2 options, and I want you to tell me in the comments which one you guess. Is it A, 30%, or is it B, 50%? Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but both options are actually wrong. It's actually 70%, with our lumber being imported from Canada and gypsum, which is the primary material in drywall, coming from Mexico. Now, of course, at the time of this recording, President Trump has announced that there will be a 90-day pause on tariffs, with the exception of China. But this is still something we'd have to keep an eye on. And this is what brings us to point number 2, which is that it's going to keep housing prices relatively high. And this is because of what we discussed in the previous point of less new construction entering inventory. In fact, if we dive deeper into the actual cost, research will tell us that even just the cost of lumber alone and the tariffs associated with lumber, it will add a minimum of $4,900 to the bottom line cost of buying a new construction home. Now, the good news is that between the years of 2022 and 2023, we've built more total housing units, meaning both single-family homes and multifamily, than ever before in history. In fact, even if you look at this time last year, there was still just under 1.6 million housing units being built. So could all the housing units that were built the last 3 years potentially supplement the supply and demand curve in the housing market? Maybe, but this is what brings us to point number 3, which is that the housing market could experience another massive boom. Now, for starters, history will tell us that every time tariffs have been issued, inflation tends to increase with it. So on one hand, the good news is that President Trump has lowered inflation to a 6-month low of 2.4%. However, on the other hand, if the tariff wars continue to get out of control and inflation uncontrollably increases like it did during the Biden administration, the Federal Reserve may be forced, like they were 4 or 5 years ago, to drop interest rates, which will ultimately mean the cost of borrowing money for things like mortgages, lines of credit, etc. will be cheaper. But then what will be almost guaranteed to happen is that we'll have millions of Americans entering the housing market as new buyers. In fact, research shows that in 2020, when the Federal Reserve lowered their rates to combat the pandemic during that time, the number of first-time home buyers that entered the market was not just 500,000, not even 1 million, but a staggering 1.76 million new buyers entering the housing market because of the lower interest rates. And of course, considering the higher cost of new home construction, we may see a housing market where we have extremely high demand on the buyer side with extremely low inventory of homes on the supply side, which is exactly what we saw in 2020, 2021, and 2022, which nobody was able to buy a home during that time. So at this point in the video, you might be asking, well, Daniel, what are you planning on doing and where are you investing your money? Now, I'm not a certified financial professional by any means, but what I will tell you what I'm doing personally is investing into assets where I not only control the income, but I get some amazing tax benefits to help keep as much of the money I make, but also combat the high inflation that's most likely right around the corner. And thankfully, it's what I've been doing the last 10, 11, 12 years, which is buying cash flowing rental properties. But if you want to learn for free on how to do that yourself, I literally wrote a free book that outlines how I scaled an 8-figure real estate portfolio step by step. All you got to do is just go to 0to75units.com and just get, again, your free book. Now, that said, all of this is ironically happening when the number of Americans getting behind on their mortgage is increasing. And to check out one of our most recent videos on that topic, I invite you to click on the screen to learn more. And for those interested in learning how to pay off your mortgage faster, check out the other video on the end screen. So thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you in the next one.